In the Western Pacific, the game between China and the United States is ramping up. In this drama, the Chinese Communist Party is losing ground and hitting a wall everywhere. On May 19th, the Philippines was resupplying the stranded ship Sierra Madre. The Chinese Coast Guard went to surround it and found that at least 2 personnel on the Philippine warship were wearing black hoods and patrolling on the deck with guns, and even pointed their guns at the Chinese Coast Guard. Faced with the provocation of the Philippines, the Chinese official media showed restraint, undermining the image of a powerful nation. China knows that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty is by no means an idle threat. Once China takes military action against the Philippines, the result will be a military strike from the United States. Seeing that China dares not take action against the Philippines, China's sphere of influence shrinks. Some speculate that from the South China Sea to the East China Sea, from the Yellow Sea to the Bohai Sea, whenever a conflict breaks out, the CCP regime will fall. Provinces will become independent and people will regain their freedom. China does not dare to take action against the Philippines because it has no confidence in winning a regional war. China's 2 aircraft carriers are still regarded as training ships. One of the key reasons is that its carrier-based aircraft, J-15, has structural problems, resulting in frequent flight accidents. According to statistics, from 2009 to 2018, the J-15 has had at least 4 crashes. Russian experts found that the J-15 may have insurmountable structural problems. After the incident, the pilot revealed that he pushed the pushrod to the bottom, but the aircraft did not respond, and eventually stalled and fell. According to insider information from the People's Liberation Army, the J-15 was developed with reference to the J-10K prototype, J-10K-3, introduced from Ukraine, and the T-10K had not yet been successfully tested when it was introduced. In addition, the J-15 is derived from the Su-27 series of fighters, and the Su-7's flight control system has problems. This defect is particularly serious on the J-15. Due to these structural problems, the PLA decided to develop a new generation of carrier-based aircraft, J-35. A pilot from the Navy said that many of his flight training classmates were almost killed. According to statistics, the PLA loses an average of more than 30 aircraft each year, and some even say that 1 aircraft crashes almost every week. U.S. satellite data shows that China's carrier-based aircraft do not fly directly to the aircraft carrier, but are transported up by crane. This practice may be to reduce the risk of landing accidents. What is even more shocking is that X Platform disclosed that in March 2022, in the waters southwest of Sanya, a 9-8 modified anti-submarine patrol aircraft crashed during a training flight, killing a total of 11 pilots, all of whom are said to be ace pilots. Some officers blindly intensified training in order to gain political achievements, eventually leading to tragedy. Faced with such a vulnerable military, how could China possibly take over Taiwan? Even the PLA's Joint Sword 2024A military exercise around Taiwan on May 23rd was a failed operation. At that time, a large number of warships, military-civilian integration equipment, and roll-on roll-off ships were quickly deployed at the same time as the military exercise was announced, forming a tight blockade in the waters around Taiwan. In the direction of Hualien in the east of Taiwan, the PLA's exercise range came close to Taiwan's territorial waters, attempting to block the Taiwan Air Force's deployment route. In the south of Taiwan, the PLA tried to cut off the port of Kaohsiung, Taiwan's logistic and economic lifeline. Its aim was to block possible U.S. military reinforcements from the Philippines. The blockade in the north was to prepare for countering the troops stationed in the islands. The PLA intends to use huge military pressure and join with pro-communist forces in Taiwan. If the subversion succeeds, the PLA can immediately land on the main island of Taiwan. However, the internal situation in Taiwan did not develop as the CCP wished. At that time, the controversial bills of the Taiwan Legislative Yuan did trigger people to protest on the streets, but these protests were essentially to safeguard Taiwan's democracy, freedom, and territorial integrity. There was absolutely no looting, military and police suppression, and bloodshed that the CCP expected, and the pro-communist forces on the island failed to seize power in the chaos. There was no change in key positions, and the presidential office remained stable. In other words, this military operation and political manipulation failed, and the PLA could only withdraw its troops half a day in advance. The U.S. military dealt with this crisis calmly. After the joint military exercise with the Japanese and South Korean navies ended on April 12th, the USS Roosevelt carrier strike group immediately went straight from the East China Sea to the South China Sea, visited Thailand, and carried out regional deterrence in an orderly manner. On April 28th, the USS Roosevelt returned to the South China Sea, patrolling from the Paracel Islands and Huangyan Islands all the way to Renai Reef, and arrived in Singapore on May 17th. After the PLA's military exercise around Taiwan ended, from May 24th to 26th, this powerful aircraft carrier formation carrying up to 90 fighter jets of various types went north to the South China Sea to conduct large-scale exercises of carrier-based aircraft takeoffs and landings, demonstrating overwhelming military superiority. Some people questioned whether the USS Roosevelt should have entered the Taiwan Strait directly, but insiders revealed that the U.S. military had noticed the PLA's unusual movements several weeks ago and judged that the troops around Taiwan were limited this time. The PLA's movements seemed more like political pressure rather than a full-scale offensive. From this Taiwan Strait crisis, we can clearly see the gap between China and the United States in the military game. Although the CCP is powerful, it lacks the courage and ability to fight. The U.S. military has resolved the crisis and stabilized the situation. The CCP's setback in the Taiwan Strait reflects the strategic dilemma it faces globally. Recently, the CCP's anti-U.S. alliance around the world has suffered major setbacks one after another. Putin originally hoped that NATO would not directly intervene in the Ukrainian conflict, but the reality is that NATO countries are not only prepared to send troops to support Ukraine, but also allow Ukraine to use NATO weapons to attack the Russian mainland. Putin knows that continuing the war will be difficult, so he can only call for peace talks and hope to reach a compromise through diplomatic means. Another ally of the CCP, Iran, is also in deep political crisis. On May 19th, Iranian President Raisi died in a plane crash. This hawkish figure advocated confronting the United States and developing nuclear weapons. His death has made the Iranian nuclear issue more complicated. Moderates hope to take this opportunity to ease relations with the West, while hardliners vow to carry on Raisi's legacy and accelerate the development of nuclear weapons. Iran is scheduled to hold a new presidential election on June 28th. The ruling and opposition parties are engaged in a fierce game over the transfer of power. With all this, it is difficult to mind Middle East affairs and Gaza. Especially in June, Hamas leader Sinwar was arrested and brought back to Israel for interrogation, making his supporters in Beijing uneasy. Faced with the successive setbacks of its allies, the CCP tried to divert the attention of the United States by creating tension in the Taiwan Strait and relieve pressure on Russia, Iran, and other countries. But it turns out that this approach not only did not help its allies get out of trouble, but also exposed the CCP's own strategic weakness. China's military displayed aggression at the Shangri-La dialogue, possibly to deflect from internal issues. Lieutenant General Jing Jianfeng's war threats and the defense minister's harsh rhetoric suggest an attempt to distract from potential military weakness or economic struggles. This scene is reminiscent of the eve of the Gulf War in 1990. At that time, Iraq invaded Kuwait. At the Arab League meeting, the Iraqi representative also spoke out, demanding that Kuwait pay up to $10 billion in compensation. However, this arrogant attitude not only did not scare Kuwait and its allies, but instead prompted the UN Security Council to quickly pass a resolution condemning Iraq's aggression, which eventually triggered the Gulf War. As we know, Saddam's regime was beaten to pieces, and eventually Saddam himself ended up being hanged. Today, the CCP's performance at the Shangri-La dialogue is very similar. They are trying to cover up their own weakness with the threat of war and are trying to force their opponents to submit to unreasonable demands. But history has repeatedly proved that such bullying will eventually backfire. Saddam made threats at Kuwait, but he did not dare to speak harshly to the United States as the CCP does. They obviously overestimated their own strength and underestimated the determination of the United States. On the Taiwan issue, the United States has never backed down. From Trump to Biden, both parties agree on China policy. No matter who enters the White House, the CCP will never be allowed to invade Taiwan by force. On May 28th, The Washington Post reported that Trump said at a national fundraising event that if Russia invades Ukraine or China invades Taiwan during his term, he will bomb Moscow and Beijing. This shows that the United States' commitment to maintaining global rule of law will not change due to changes in political parties or presidents. Trump repeatedly pressured the CCP on the Taiwan issue during his tenure, greatly enhancing U.S.-Taiwan relations. Even after leaving office, he is still influential in this area. The CCP is obviously nervous about Trump's warning. The Chinese Ministry of Defense held 2 consecutive press conferences to make a tough statement. On May 30th, Wu Qian, a spokesman for the Ministry of Defense, responded at a regular press conference that if the report is true, this statement is crazy. On June 1st, the spokesman further stated that the Chinese military is ready to partner militarily with Russia. Despite the bluster, the CCP knows that no matter who wins the White House, Russia and China will have a hard time. Since the outbreak of the Ukrainian war, the Biden administration has spared no effort in sanctions against Russia. If Biden is re-elected, he is expected to start a new Cold War. By then, the CCP will have little room to maneuver in Taiwan and the Korean Peninsula. During Trump's administration, many anti-American forces dared not act rashly. Even Iran and North Korea are in awe of Trump. It is expected that if he returns to office, he will never allow China and Russia to challenge the dominance of the United States in the region, and he is likely to use more drastic measures to force China and Russia to submit. Historical experience shows that appeasement policies often have little effect on authoritarian regimes. Only firm deterrence and necessary punishment can let them know what the red line is. Chamberlain's appeasement policy eventually led to the tragedy of World War II. Trump's tough stance on rogue regimes such as China and Russia is undoubtedly correct. Only by talking to them in a language they understand can they restrain their behavior. Back to the Shangri-La dialogue, which took place in May and June this year in Singapore. Ukrainian President Zelensky's attendance was undoubtedly the highlight. Singapore is within the CCP's sphere of influence. In such a place, Zelenskyy spoke freely and received full protection from the United States. In his keynote speech, Zelenskyy exposed the CCP. He made it clear that most of the weapons used by Russia were made in China, and the intercepted arms and intelligence showed that the CCP was providing support behind the scenes. This must have embarrassed CCP representatives sitting in the audience. Zelenskyy said that global security is impossible when the world's largest countries ignore recognized borders, international law, and the UN Charter. The largest countries here obviously referred to China and Russia. Zelenskyy also reminded Asian countries to learn lessons from Ukraine. Ukraine once generously assisted China in developing its military industry, from aircraft carriers to submarines, from fighter jets to tanks, and provided China with a lot of help. As a result, the CCP in turn supported Russia in launching a war against Ukraine, and abstained from condemning Russia many times in the UN Security Council, and even secretly supported Putin. Zelenskyy's remarks are of great warning to Asian countries. Many Asian countries are facing the temptation of CCP investment. If they follow the CCP, they may end up with the tragic experience that Ukraine is experiencing today. Moreover, if each country goes its own way, it will eventually be at the mercy of others. To this end, Zelenskyy called on Asian countries to unite and stand firmly on the side of the free camp led by the United States, build an alliance against Russia and the CCP, and form an Asian version of NATO to effectively resist the aggressive ambitions of China and Russia. Today, the CCP's aggression in the South China Sea and East China Sea has aggravated many nations, and Zelenskyy's speech undoubtedly resonated strongly with them. If the CCP regime is overthrown, Asia is likely to have a reconstruction plan similar to the Marshall Plan, and the countries participating in it will usher in a new round of industrial revolution and economic prosperity. On the contrary, if they miss this historic opportunity, they may repeat the mistakes of Spain after World War II. Spain remained neutral in World War II and relies on tourism and agriculture to maintain its economy until today. Let's look at the Philippines. Because 88% of the people in the 1935 referendum supported independence rather than joining the United States, the Philippines also missed the opportunity to develop together with the United States. In contrast, Hawaii, which joined the United States through a referendum in 1959, enjoys the benefits of the American Union. In contrast, the Philippines has been plagued by terrorism and gangs for decades. If a country is isolated from the international order, it is doomed to be in chaos and become a victim of the game between major powers. Just like Niger. After the withdrawal of the United States and France, China and Russia took advantage of the situation, and the whole country fell into a turbulent situation similar to Syria. Asian countries must think carefully and make the right choice between China and the United States. The Shangri-La Dialogue, which was originally intended to discuss Asia-Pacific security issues, has actually become a big stage for the United States to gather anti-communist forces. The United States has obviously made sufficient preparations. U.S. military focus in Asia, along with alliances like the Quad, suggest a growing regional counterweight to China's influence. And Zelensky's presence is undoubtedly the most critical link in the United States' Asia-Pacific strategic layout. He used Ukraine's painful lessons to warn Asian countries against the CCP's false promises. The United States used the Shangri-La Dialogue as a model of diplomatic strategy. On the other hand, although the CCP is trying to win over some countries, it has achieved little success. The CCP has no real friends in Asia, only slaves driven by interests. Although the CCP has been spreading money to many countries under the Belt and Road Initiative, when the United States launched a diplomatic offensive against the CCP at the Shangri-La Dialogue, the CCP could not muster an effective response. With Zelensky's arrival, America's influence in the Asia-Pacific region has reached unprecedented levels. By having Zelenskyy speak, the U.S. exposed the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party, a regime willing to betray friends and undermine peace for its own interests. Faced with such undeniable evidence, what can the CCP expect? No amount of money can restore its moral standing. As more countries recognize the danger posed by the CCP, the United States is building a circle of friends in the Asia-Pacific to counter it, leaving the CCP increasingly isolated. When that day comes, even Russia might not want to align with the CCP. The CCP's influence in the Asia-Pacific region is facing unprecedented challenges. Not only does its aggression in the South China Sea and East China Sea make neighboring countries feel deeply uneasy, but its credibility and moral image on the international stage has also bottomed out. What's more fatal is that as the United States increases pressure on China, the CCP's own institutional problems and economic difficulties become more apparent. Today, although the CCP is still resisting, a new order led by the United States is taking shape in the Asia-Pacific region, and a regional framework that excludes and contains the CCP is taking shape. In this process, the CCP will not only lose the opportunity to dominate Asia-Pacific affairs, it is more likely to collapse under the siege of the international community. Of course, the final outcome of history has not yet been revealed, but one thing is certain: any regime that is hostile to peace and development, any political party that goes against the trend of freedom, democracy, and human rights will eventually fail. What the CCP is doing now is just accelerating this process. The CCP's days are sure to be numbered.